We are live. I'm not sure that anybody's there though, because they might all think that we're going to be here at 3 o'clock.
Well,
Right now
sometimes it
zero
just
people
happens.
here. You know what? I'm not sure what we should do because you know, I mean, if there's nobody here, there's one person, or is that person you?
That might be me.
Oh no, 17 people here now. Okay, it just took.
Good.
It just took a second for it to catch up and warm up.
I'm glad.
You know, we talk to ourselves enough. But all right, Diana Benson is here. Robert is here. Yes, we are having communications problems. Emma is here.
Just a little.
Good. All right. Thank you. That's a relief because, 27 people are here. All right. Good. I'm Danny Gregory.
I'm Koosje Koene.
That's Koosje. That's pointing in the wrong direction. There's Koosje. And yes, I apologize to everybody. There was a screw up. Several people are going to be severely beaten and then thrown out of the building as a result of this horrible snafu that set the time at the wrong time. But thanks so much for being here anyway. It's not at noon West Pacific, it is at noon Eastern. So we're here, and that's enough.
We are here,
We're here to keep
and that's really all that counts.
Exactly, we're keeping it real.
So even if people show up in 2 hours, then they will see this video. It won't be live, but it's as good as live, right?
True. It's true. So,
yeah.
So Koosje, this is the last week of our class, isn't it?
No, it's not. Actually, next week we have friends.
Oh, of course. We do have
yeah,
friends.
we're in week 3. Yeah.
I know. I'm just all turned around. This snafu has.
Yeah, it has thrown
as Robert
you
says,
off.
it is a tradition. It is. It's a tradition. It's a tradition we're trying not to uphold any longer, but nonetheless, here we are.
Thank you, Robert. Yes.
So, if you guys have questions for us, or more specifically, for Koosje, please post them here in the add a comment. Post them in the chat so that we'll know what you'd like to know. Because Koosje, you talked about a lot of interesting things. You talked about negative space was really the main focus of a lot of what you talked about, and we did have a couple of questions that had been shared with us before, right? These are oldish questions, and I wonder if we should talk about some of them. So one person asks, when my drawing looks pale or bland, I wonder if it needs more vibrant color or perhaps darker shadows when I'm done and I notice this problem. What is the suggested fix? I think darker shadows is certainly a good idea. If you're feeling like your drawing is flat, if you're doing a color drawing and you feel like it's flat, that may be because you don't have enough contrast in your drawing. And contrast can come from shadows. Contrast can also come from complementary colors. But when you're trying to draw realistically, a lot of the times you want to just look at what you see and use that as the start. So you might find that darker shadows add dimension, but they also could make your drawing look muddy. What do you think about this, Koosje? It's your week to answer questions.
I think even if you ask yourself the question, does my drawing need more bright colors? I think you are already answering your question.
That's true.
I think as soon as you think this needs something, this needs brightness, then you should add it. But you should be kind of careful with it, so you don't, use your drawing as a coloring page and then add bright colors everywhere. But maybe you can just find a point in your drawing where you want to put the emphasis on. And that's where you put that bright color. And I agree that, especially when you work with watercolors, adding darker shadows can be a little bit scary, but it can be super effective. So that would be my response to that.
Well, here we have what appears to be our first question from the live audience, from Susan. She says,
Good.
what does it mean when a person refers to their painting as tonal? Well, I would think, I'm not entirely sure, because it's not a
No, me
phrase that I
neither.
use, but I think what it means is that their focus is on the range of tones rather than on the hues. So in other words, what you're really focusing on is the contrast. So you could do a painting that basically has one or two colors in it. So it could be almost the equivalent of a black and white picture, but it has a layer of color on it. But tonal means that you're representing the range of the tones of just the light. So you're just showing the black and white, the shades of gray in between, and you're focusing less on are you getting all of the range of colors in it. I think that's what it refers to.
Yeah. So you can really just choose to have one color and use that in many shades, or actually in many tones. Is that it? Is it in many tones or many shades? I don't know. That's what actually also
shade.
really
I think shade is another word for tone.
confuses me.
Yeah, shade is like is a more common word for tone.
Okay.
As opposed to hue, which means if you did something that had a range of hues, you would have all the different colors in it. But a range of tones. So in other words, you could do a painting that was just red.
Yeah.
And everything from dark red to light red. Or
Yeah.
you could do a painting that was all black and white, and then you have one color that's flat that's laid on top or underneath it. So that it represents that. I mean, it's a way of representing realism. It's not what we see, but it is. I think it's sort of the equivalent also of having. So tonal is monochrome. It can be. Yeah, it can be. I mean, I think it can be like. I think you could do something that was tonal that had more than one color in it. Monochrome suggests one color. But I think the focus is on the light and the dark as opposed to the colors. But again, it could be limited palette would be another aspect of it too. Always.
Yeah, and I think it isn't just monochrome, because I think you can find, if you have colored pencils, for example, you can find a yellow pencil that is light yellow, and it is in the same tone range of a green pencil that you have. That's also, it has the same tone. It's both light and it falls under the same kind of tone. I think it's a little bit complicated. I want to learn more about that, because I always wonder a little bit, like, where is that distinction of tone? But you can have, of course, many shades of one color, and that is already very interesting to work with.
I mean, there's a type of painting that's called, I think it's called grisage, and it's sort of an old style of painting. I think it's not used that much anymore, but basically what you do is you first do a tonal painting, or you first do a tonal drawing, and then you add color, transparent color, on top of it. So it's almost like taking a black and white photograph and then colorizing it, and so that's a way of really focusing on the tone. So I think Marlene asked an interesting question: is hatching always tonal? So I would say it isn't, and in fact we talked about it a couple weeks ago in my class, because I would say that you can do hatching that's also textural. You can use you can use hatching that also represents color. So for instance, if somebody was wearing a dress that had red flowers on it, you could hatch those where the flowers were, you could hatch them differently than the background of the dress to suggest that there's a different color there. So it isn't, they would all be lit the same, right? The dress is all lit the same. So the hatching that's there is representing the color. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think that is totally true. And I don't have anything to add.
Sorry, I'm answering all
I
the
was
questions.
trying to say something smart, but I don't have anything to add.
I'm sorry, I'm mansplaining my way through this one. All right, you can take this one. Here we go. This is from Thistle. This is from Thistle. You know who? And we know Thistle. You know who? So, what do you think about Thistle's question?
So
how do you know
she's
when to stop?
asking,
Go ahead.
how do you know when to stop? What stopping point do you use to prevent overworking a piece? I think preventing to overwork a piece, to be able to do that, you need to overwork a piece a lot of times. You know, you need to overwork your work, and then make that mistake over and over again, and then you learn, and you're like, maybe at this point I need to stop. So it's not really, there are not really rules about that. It's really, I think you sort of develop a feeling for it, and you can see it also in your drawings. Like, oh no, I hatched too many hatching lines, I did too much here, or I sort of made a mud of the watercolor. So, and that's how you learn. I think leaving a lot of white in your drawing actually is a really good trick to not muddy it up, or to not feel like it's overworked. It keeps some kind of airiness to your drawing, and that's what I really like. If I fill every bit of my paper up, it does feel too much information, and I think that might also be the feeling of it being overworked. How do you know when to stop? I don't know. If I look at my own drawing practice, sometimes I just stop because I don't feel like it anymore. Then it's just my stopping point, and whether the drawing is finished or not doesn't really matter. That's just my stopping point, and then my drawing is done. Sometimes I'm having a lot of fun, but I'm like, okay, now I am really just fiddling around. There is this point that you are like adding a little bit here and adding a little bit there. That is, to me, if I start fiddling, that is when I need to step away from the drawing. And because I know that then that is the point that I will overwork, or that I will put too much into it. So that would be my answer. Do you agree? Do you have other ways of?
Yeah, I mean, I think I certainly agree with you that you have to go too far to recognize that point. I think it can be like cooking. Like, you can just put too much salt in it, and then you go, shouldn't do that next time. But I think there's also comes a time when you're drawing, when you start to panic a little bit, and that's when you start to overwork things. When you're like, oh, this isn't really working, and you start to wrestle it into place, and well, let me just try one more layer, or let me just try some other kind of approach to cross hatching, and you keep doing things like that. And when you do that, I'm a little hesitant in saying this, because I think that there are times when you have to just keep working on it. And certainly that's what someone like Tommy Kane would say. Keep working, keep working. France, as we're going to discover next week, France works and works and works on her thing. But I think a lot of it is, do you have a point of view in what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to do, as opposed to, do I just go into the pantry and pull out every spice I have and pour that all into the stew and hope that something fixes it? Or there are times when you have to work hard on a drawing. Like, you have a lot of, it's going to be a lot to cover, and I think even when you're in that situation, you might ask yourself, do I need to represent absolutely everything that I'm seeing? Or can I actually engage the viewer even more by allowing some things to be left to their imagination? And so it's like, if I draw, do I have to draw every hair on the head? Do I have to draw, every leaf on the tree? Or can I suggest them? Can I clump them together? Can I have shapes that might be less so? Strangely, I've also found that the iPad has been really helpful to me in that, because what will happen is sometimes is when I'm drawing, and I'll say, okay, let me try, this isn't going well, let me try adding some other technique on it. I'll put that on another layer, and I'll try that, and then I'll say, all right, that was a bad idea. I can just turn that layer off. So, but I'll get to that point where I think, okay, I'm getting desperate. So I think it's trying to find your way through the desperation and say, let's not be rash here. Let's take it easy.
Yes, that's a good point about the iPad. Because on the iPad, because I am really still learning, that's where I fiddle a lot. I can just spend hours on just one drawing, and then it turns out like mediocre anyway. But I learn a lot during the whole process because of those layers that you can just try out, and then you're like, oh, that doesn't work at all. But maybe if I do this, So it's really a little bit like a puzzle, and I think fiddling is the way you learn. Like just trying a lot of things and experimenting, and then you discover what works and what doesn't work. And then that's on the iPad. But for example, sometimes I think I have figured it all out, in my sketchbook. I'm like, this really works, this pen, and then that watercolor, it's perfect. And then I finish that sketchbook, and I have another sketchbook. And then I try that again because I have that favorite pen. It works so great. It's the magic pen, And then I try that in that new sketchbook. It totally doesn't work at all. I try hatching, and it's just, So you need to discover it all over again. And I think that is the fun part of it as well.
True. So I think it's kind of like when you reach the point of feeling like it's overworked, you have two choices. You can either turn the page and start something new, or sometimes you can work your way through the overworking, and turn it into something else. If that's what you want to do, it's a struggle. It might be a learning opportunity. Maybe you need to cut the drawing up into a collage and use it to make some other drawing with. I mean, there are lots of things that you can do. So, all right, I think I'm hoping that gives you 15 answers to your question. So Kate has an interesting question here. She says, is negative space always your starting point in a drawing, or do you use it more when that technique seems to lend itself to a specific kind of drawing? That's a great question.
I think seeing negative space has become sort of like second nature. Sometimes when I'm not drawing, but I'm just sitting somewhere talking to someone and looking around or looking at that person, and for example, they are sitting on with a wall behind them, and it's like quite blank or has a certain color. I just see that shape. It just occurs to me like there's a negative shape there. Or if I look into the corner of my studio where two chairs are, I see the negative shapes between the legs of the chair and all that. So I do see it all the time. When I draw, I don't always start with the negative space. It really depends a little bit on the subject. But when I'm drawing, I always somewhere I include it because it makes me help to measure and to see proportions. So there's always some bit of negative space because it's there, And when there is like a bunch of chairs or something like that with a lot of legs or things that are crossing each other, I'm like, I don't even know how to make sense out of that. That's when I really just focus on the negative space, because then I just filter out the panic of how do I draw this? And that really is a very calming way to try and capture what you are seeing. So I mix it. I think I mix it because I also really like using the continuous line. And that doesn't always make sense if you are, looking at the negative shapes, because those can be just shapes put down in pieces. And when you use a continuous line, you don't really pick up your pen. So I actually really like combining those two very different techniques in my drawing.
I think negative space is also something that you can go to when you're stuck or when you've made a decision and somehow it isn't kind of working together, and you go, why doesn't that look right? And then you say, well, let me look at the negative space of it. And when you do, you go, oh, well, of course, the shoulder is actually over there, or the ear is sticking out that way. So the negative space can be like a way of checking what you're doing. And I think there's also a trick to, like, for instance, I'm looking at you right now. The negative space behind you isn't a flat color, right? So there's a whole bunch of things behind you, and yet I have to be able to say to myself, I'm going to ignore the fact that, that negative space is broken up and see the whole thing as a piece of negative space. That's like a trick as well, I think, to doing it.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, and sometimes the negative space can also be, like you say, if you have a drawing and you're not really happy about it, sometimes what I do, for example, I've been drawing on location. I have just a pen drawing, and then later on I am back home and I look at the drawing again. I'm like, it's kind of boring. And then sometimes what I do is just use the negative space, look at the negative space, for example, a wall behind, and just make that bright yellow or something like that. And that just makes the foreground really come forward, and it just brings some kind of balance to your drawing, or it brings just a little bit of fun to the drawing. I don't like looking, going through my sketchbook and then thinking, that's boring. If I can fix it, I want to fix it. And if it's just, one piece of color adding to it, it's a pretty good fix.
Right, because the negative space, emphasizing the negative space, can sometimes pull a bunch of different shapes together into one thing. So you can say like these shapes are actually one thing. Like what some artists will do is they'll use a white line around things. Like we've seen that with urban sketches. So you'll say, here's a bunch of things, and what I want to do is I want to represent them as the foreground. So I want to say, here's some people, there's some buildings back there, and there's some clouds back there. And so I can draw around the people to say they're kind of standing forward, and that's almost defining the negative space or defining all of these different groups as one thing, if that's clear. So that's another way of sort of using the technique of negative space. Okay. Here we have a question from Fran. She says, thoughts on erasing pencil lines, pencil drawing first or straight into ink? So,
well, that's for you.
Well, okay. I would say I gather from Fran's question that she is suggesting a certain way of drawing that I don't think either of us particularly do, which is that first you do a drawing in pencil, then you do a drawing in ink on top of it, and I think she's asking, do you then erase the pencil? It's not the way that really either of us draw, and frankly a lot of people at the faculty at Sketchbook School don't draw that way either, which is we just draw in pen or we just draw in pencil, but we're not using pencil as like a first draft of a drawing and then having more confidence in going back in with pencil. Sometimes if you're really feeling unsure, but generally that's not the way I think either of us work. And I think stylistically you might decide that if you do that, you might decide to leave the pencil line there just to indicate this is the way I saw it. Or you might find that the pencil line is getting in the way of the clarity of the pen line because it's a second thought. But my suggestion would be, don't approach it that way. Just draw the way you want to draw and slow down and think about what you're doing and proceed with confidence rather than doing some kind of sketchy thing and then drawing over it again. I mean, you'll see like comic book artists will draw that way. They'll do pencil and then they'll do the inking, and that's in part because the actual ink line is making a graphic design statement that's different from what the pencil line would do. Anyway, but I would say in general, don't assume that that's the way artists work, that you do a first draft in pencil and a second draft in pen. That's generally not the case, I don't think. But what do you think?
Yeah, well, I agree. And one thing that Veronica Lawler says in one of our courses just really stuck with me, and I quote her very often, because what happens if you use pencil instead of going straight into pen is that you draw a line, and when you use a pencil, it's fine, but you should not use an eraser then, So, because when you use a pencil and you're like, okay, I'm using a pencil, so every mistake that I make, I can just erase it. And what Veronica says is, just like when you walk, you're not going to take 2 steps and then stop and say, wait, that wasn't a good step, let's go back and do it again. I think that is just a really great way to explain, like, why don't you just let your line flow? It's fine if the line is a little bit wonky or it isn't just right. It's fine to make mistakes and you can work with it. And it's a lot more fun to just draw that line and then work with that instead of drawing a line, then maybe erasing it, drawing another line, then you have your perfect line, which won't be perfect anyway, and then go over it once more with a pen. What's the fun in that? So you're drawing like a drawing twice or 3 or 4 times. I think especially when you are drawing, from observation, that is just really slowing down, and it's less fun. I do understand why you would do it if you draw from imagination or comic book artists. That totally makes sense. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I would go back to what you said, drawing from observation. So
yeah,
the trick is observe accurately the first time. That just takes practice. That just takes time. That just makes decisions, and it also comes from living with your mistakes. Live with your mistakes and then move on from there. So draw from observation by being willing to do a drawing that isn't right or isn't 100% accurate, but learn from that experience and then go and try it again. Try doing another one on the next page and continue doing that. So you're observing more, your lines are going to become more accurate. It's just going to be a better drawing. Okay, so I want to bring up this question from Emma, and I'm not sure how you'll answer it, but it'll be interesting to see. She says, seeing negative space, wish I could get this. It just takes lots of practice. I could see the potential, but never see it. I have to really look. I think that's understandable. A lot of people have that feeling. I don't see negative space, because you're seeing something that kind of isn't there, and particularly when the background is complicated, it's even harder. What are some of the tricks that you would give people to do to see?
Wow. Well, you have this really classic.
I say vase, but a lot of Americans
vase. I'll say vase too. Easier to see, but once you have seen that, I think there is a click in there that you can start seeing it when you draw from observation. So if you look at a chair and it has arm rests, then you will see that there will be sort of a square or a certain shape between the armrest and I don't even know how to explain it. I want to show, but do you know what I'm trying to say? Do you understand what I'm trying to say there?
I think it helps to the easiest kind of way. Sorry guys, we lost sound for a minute. I think it's back. Hopefully it's back. Okay, sorry about that. We lost sound briefly. So one thing that I would suggest is practice by looking at negative space against flat colors. So for instance, yeah. So like, go out and look at like the gap between buildings and look at the sky. Look at if something is sitting up against a painted wall. Like the negative space behind both of us right now is very complicated. I mean, it is negative space, but it's complicated to see. But if you start looking at it, and then also I would say start practicing by doing more complicated things, like as you say, like it's like if I take my hand and I put it against yellow, can I see these spaces between my fingers as a shape, and then, or if I take, certainly a chair is a great example too, things that are kind of complicated, and just draw the negative space. So I do think it is a matter of training your brain, and then something happens where it clicks, and you suddenly see it suddenly clicks in, and you will start to just instantly be able to see it. But try and force it by making it easy initially. People are still complaining about audio, I see. But
yeah.
okay.
I don't know what to
we
do
can
about
just
that.
proceed. Yeah, I mean, we'll just proceed with it. Okay, so.
Yeah, one more thing. One of the really great things to do to just practice native spaces is, for example, put your keys. There's always, if you have a ring with like 2, 3, 4 keys on it, put them on the table on just a one color surface, and then try to draw the surface the keys are on. And that is really a good exercise to really look at only the background and not at all those details that keys have.
Right, and say to yourself, "I'm drawing the table, not I'm drawing." Because if you're drawing the keys, then you'll start drawing each individual key. But if instead you say, "I'm just going to draw the table," I can't see all the table because part of it's covered with keys. But let me draw the shape I can see of the floor. Or the table, whatever it is. Okay.
Yep.
So the sound is continuing to cut in and out, so I'm not sure what to say.
No.
Anyway, so several people are bringing up the fact that Felix Scheinberger uses a technique where he draws his initial impression with watercolor, and then he comes back into his pen. I also talked about that in the class scene. That was the first time that I introduced that idea of, and the idea behind it is something I think that you can apply even if you're not going to do watercolors, which is that there are different ways of seeing depending on how long and how the particular way that you look at something. So if you look at something very quickly, you'll say to yourself, it's a person. And then if you look at that person more carefully, you'll say, oh, it's Koosje. And then if you look at them more carefully, I'll start to say, I start to notice the details of the person, and I start to notice the specifics of the person. And then similarly when you draw, so I could do a quick drawing that just says there's a head, there's shoulders. And then I could say, so if I said to myself, I'm going to do a drawing in 10 seconds, what are the things that I would observe? And then if I said I'm going to spend 10 minutes or an hour doing that drawing, what are the things that I'm going to observe? Now, it isn't to say that that first drawing that took 10 seconds is not as good as the drawing that took an hour. It can actually happen that the opposite is true, because sometimes a drawing that you spend an hour on can be really labored, it can be stiff, it can be overly detailed, and I'm losing the life of the person. And the original 10-second drawing actually had a lot of energy. So one thing you can do, which is sort of where Felix is coming from and where I was coming from in my exercise, is to say, let's capture that energy, and you can use a highlight marker. So you take one of those bright yellow markers or blue markers, and you just do a really quick drawing, and say to yourself, I'm going to spend 1 minute doing this drawing, and then I'm going to use that as the base for another drawing I'm going to do on top of it in pen, and that drawing is going to be more slow, more methodical, but it's going to sit on top of that initial scene. And the combination of them, you don't erase that first one, of course. They both live together, and they say something much more interesting, I think, than either one would by itself, at least in my experience.
I agree, yeah, that is a really great way to do it. Absolutely.
All right, good. Okay, so everybody is happy now. So somebody's says
everybody's happy now. That sounds good.
Okay, so Yara hasn't really formulated a particular question, but she says transparency. Please talk about it. Well, transparency.
Transparency?
Yeah, it's not really a question.
About what?
It's not really a question. I think does she want us to be more transparent? I think what she means is, how do you draw something that's transparent? So in other words, like how would you draw a glass bottle? How would you draw that?
A glass bottle. Well, a glass bottle often is not like super transparent, so you will still see the overall shape. So when I see a bottle, I will just first draw the outline, and then actually use shading, because you will see in glasses, bottles, you will see sort of different tones. And so usually I use that to draw it, and then you can also often see reflections that you can use. But you need to be kind of careful. For example, if you are hatching, to not do very dark hatching, because then you don't see any transparency anymore. But the great thing is you can see probably the bottom of the bottle, so you can have a light. You can draw a light line to see it, to show it. So you can play a little bit with the thickness of your line to show, like, this actually shows through. Is that a good explanation? I feel I'm not explaining myself very well right now.
I think you're struggling with it because I think there's something implied in the question that neither of us agree with. And so what that means is that we don't have a technique for drawing transparency. We don't have a technique for drawing water. There isn't a technique for it. There's choices that you might make to represent the way something looks. But, I mean, what does transparency mean? Right? So here's a glass of water. And, if you look at me through that glass of water, what would you say? Is there a particular way that you would draw that? I mean, here you can see, like, my face is, like, weirdly reflected in here and distorted on the side. There's sections that are very light. There's this very dark section here that's the top, right? There's gray lines here. There's a bit of a reflection of the building that's in front of me over here. There's part of my finger you can see down below there. See, there's a million things that are going on in here. So I can't tell you that there's a way to do this, but what I can tell you to do is draw what you see. Draw this weird, this weird distorted version of my face with me behind it. Color this in black if you want to, So again, this comes down to looking. There's no clever way of saying, use this pen or use this line technique. There's a language that you have to come up with to translate what you see into lines on the paper. Okay, and so you might decide to say that the way that I represent medium gray is with lines that are a certain distance apart from each other, and the way I represent white is by leaving the paper blank. And there's all these different techniques that you come up with. It's a graphic language that when I look at it, I can understand that you're representing things that aren't just tone, but might represent color, might represent reflection, all these other things. So this comes down to, like, working over time to develop different ways of expressing what you see. But it begins by really looking, and by really looking at what you're saying and saying, rather than, boy, I wish I had a technique for drawing water or drawing glass, you say, let me just look at a glass of water and let me put it in a situation where it's reflecting things. Because there are times when you might draw a glass of water where literally you're not seeing anything. It just looks like the same color as its background. But it might be that it's reflecting all kinds of things. Draw those reflections. So if something is fully transparent, well, you don't see anything, so there's nothing to draw. You just see right through it. But really, by looking and observing, and I've drawn a lot of glasses of water, I've drawn vases, I've drawn all kinds of things just to study that. It's a fascinating thing to do because you keep seeing more and more and more things as you look at that, and you keep saying, wow, I'd never noticed that is reflecting the back of the glass and it's curving in this weird way. It's like solving a crossword puzzle. Just keep looking and seeing more and putting more and more down on paper. That's what I would say is the answer to your not incredibly transparent question. But should we move on? Okay. So I hope that answers your question. Wendy's asking, are the words tone, shade, and value interchangeable? Tone, shade, and value, sort of, I would say, as much as they need to be. Tone, shade, yeah, I would say they're fairly interchangeable. I mean, value is kind of more of an art school sort of word. But yes, I would say tone and hue and saturation. Those are usually the three variables. So how dark is it? Is it light brown, dark brown, medium brown? That's the tone. What is the hue? Is it brown? Is it yellow? Is it red? Is it green? Is it blue? And the saturation. Is it bright red? Is it kind of dusky red? Is it washed out red? Those are the three variables: tone / hue / shade, and then tone / shade / value, and then hue, i.e. the color, and then saturation, the richness, the dilutedness of it. But I don't know, do you really need that language?
I don't know, if you have a pen, does it really matter what it's called?
Right.
You know, just, yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, it's good to understand it, so, yeah.
All right, here's our next question. In breaking things into smaller shapes, do you keep in mind the end, the whole, or do you just concentrate on the small parts? Sometimes I get lost in the parts and the end drawing is wonky. So in other words, if you're drawing, do you draw all the elements of the object, or do you keep thinking about the fact that it's,
it happens to me too, that I'm like having so much fun just putting shape after shape, next to each other. Like, oh, there's shape here, there's shape here, there's shape here. And then actually I forgot that I started over there and I started working a little bit larger for some reason, and then it's all wonky. I don't really mind if that happens. So I don't have one approach for every drawing I make. Every drawing, it's a surprise to me too what's going to happen. I just start somewhere and then I'll see where it ends. So I don't always have a plan. So I also don't always have the whole thing in my mind, like this is what it's going to be ending like. But if there is a certain thing that I really want to capture, a certain scene or part of or on a location, I'm like, I really want to have certain parts in it, then yes, I do sort of switch from the overall image back to the more detailed like patches of negative space, and then switch back, like, is everything still in place? Oh no, maybe I need to. And then I also just go to a different spot in the drawing to do some negative space drawing over there, just to make sure that I am still in line with all the different proportions that I need to, that I want to bring into the drawing. But also sometimes I just make things up, if I want to include something that I see over there, but it doesn't fit in my page, I just make it, you just shift it so it does fit in my drawing. That is the fun about drawing. You can just shift things, you can just move things if you want to include it in your drawing. If you think it's important for your drawing, it doesn't matter that it's over there and you're drawing that, but you do want to include something that's over there. Just turn it around and draw it. So of course that is just playing. And if you are drawing from observation and you're really trying to draw realistically, then there is, a part of that is like, can I actually do this? But I think you can.
Interesting. I mean, I often will draw the whole before I draw the details. So I'll start a lot of times by drawing a contour drawing of the outside of whatever it is. So if I'm drawing a landscape, I might draw down one side of the building, across the roofs of the other buildings, around the tree, up against. In a way, I'm drawing the negative shape. Negative space, but a lot of times I'm also just, or if, say I draw, there's a car, and I'll draw the whole outside of the car. And then I'll go in and I'll draw the windshield, and I'll draw the tires, and I'll draw the things. So I'm kind of starting with the outside, and a lot of times that's super wonky, because it's hard to draw the outside of something without reference points. But I'll go, okay, here I'm drawing along the roof, and now I'm coming down the side. So I draw that outside shape, and then it's like Carlos Aponte says, I draw, the room, and then I furnish it. I build the house, and then I put the furnishing in. So it's like draw the outside of the person, their shoulders, their head, and then go in and draw the features inside. There are some people, if any of you were with me, when I talked, was it France? No, with Helen last week on Draw With Me. Helen draws the features, and then she draws the head. And I draw the head, and then I draw the features. So she'll start by drawing an eye, and then she'll draw the next eye, and then she'll draw the nose, and she'll draw the mouth. And I'll draw the head, the ears, the shoulders, the neck, and then I'll go in and figure out where the eye is. And then, so, but I understand what Francine's World's question is, which is, can you get lost in it? I mean, because another way of looking at drawing is, we had Miguel Herranz in the urban sketching class talks about this thing that he calls the spiral technique. And if you're drawing,
that is so fantastic.
Yeah, so if you're drawing like a really complicated landscape, there's a cityscape, there's people, there's buildings, there's cars, there's birds, there's all kinds of stuff. Pick a spot that is interesting to you, and draw that one little thing. Here's a bird. I'm going to draw that bird. Now the bird is sitting on a telephone wire, so I'm going to draw the telephone wire. The telephone wire hits a pole, and I'm going to go down the pole. The pole goes behind a building, so I'm going to start drawing the roof of that building. And then, and so forth. So then I'm drawing the bus, and now I'm drawing the sidewalk, and then, lo and behold, I've drawn the whole scene. So the scene that seemed overwhelming to me, it's actually just made up of lots of things. So if I draw all the things, I've drawn the scene. So when you say, is there a larger shape to it? Is there a larger thing? I'm not drawing the scene. There is no such thing as the scene. There's just all the things that make it up. So it really depends. I mean, lots of different ways of approaching, big to small, small to big. Try them both. Try, or another way you can do it is you can also say, I'm going to draw all the biggest shapes, and then I'm going to draw the medium-sized shapes that sit inside the bigger shapes, and I'm going to work my way down to the smaller shapes, and just look at it that way. It's all experimentation. Some things will work for you. Some things will work for you in a certain given situation and don't work for you in another situation. So the more of those things you've tried out, the more tools you have in your toolbox, the more prepared you are for any given situation. So, all right. So let's talk about. Here's a question from Jen. She says, when you're urban sketching, do you ever do thumbnails first, or do you usually just go right to sketching?
I never do thumbnails. I always forget about thumbnails. Yeah, because I see people do it, and then I'm like, oh, that's really smart, because now you actually know what you can fit into your page. But I always am sort of so happy to start drawing that I don't want to do a test drive. I just want to draw. So I just forget about doing a little thumbnail in the corner of my page, and it's fine. Everybody has their own ways of sort of getting acquainted with the subject they're drawing, or getting comfortable or more confident. And I think thumbnails can be really helpful for that. I just sometimes run out of paper because I did not plan it well. Especially when drawing buildings, I'm like, oh, I can't fit the tower in, or I didn't even, I can't even draw the people in the street because I just can only fit the first, the highest two stories of the building in, and then I just embrace that and I just draw whatever I can. If you want to, prevent that, then definitely do a thumbnail, but I actually never do it. Do you do that? Do you use that as a tool or the helpful?
I was thinking about like the only time I can think of in a sketchbook school class where people did thumbnails was, I remember in a drawing a day, Veronica Lawler is drawing the Brooklyn Bridge, and she does a couple of thumbnails before she does her drawing of the bridge, and she just sort of figuring out the composition and sort of thinking, what is the shape of the drawing that would be best for this? And I think it's an interesting thing. I think the difference between the way you and I draw and Veronica draws is Veronica is an illustrator. And I'm going to wager that Gen C, judging by her little icon, might be an illustrator too. And I think if you're an illustrator, you think in terms of the final drawing, perhaps. And I think you and I think more in terms of just the process of drawing, just the fun of making a drawing. We don't care that much about what the drawing ends up looking like at the end. So I think it would be probably smarter if we did do thumbnails. Sometimes it would make the likelihood of disaster at the end come, that you'd kind of figured out some of those things. But I think in general, if you just want to kind of sit down and start just drawing any old thing, then that's why something like this Miguel's spiral technique is so reflects, I think, the way we think of drawing, because you just say like, I'll see if I run out of paper. If I keep spiraling out,
Exactly,
I run out of
yeah.
paper, I'm like, okay, I'm done. You know, so that's just what I would say.
Yeah, I think it really depends. Liz Steele does it too in one of our courses. But I think it depends what you want. I really like the element of surprise of drawing. If I start drawing, I never really know what I'm getting myself into, you know? And I like that. I like the point where I think, oh, why did I start this? And then once it's just a bump, and then you get over that bump, and then you're really happy. Like, okay, well, you know, I'm just dealing with you are problem solving, and that's part of the creative process. But if you feel the need of having more control, then I think doing a thumbnail like that is really, really handy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe we have to start doing thumbnails. I don't know. Now I feel like I should be doing thumbnails. Oh. Well. So some people have been in the comments have been. Well, I see this comment from Francine. She says she loves the idea of drawing a room, then furnishing it. That's from Carlos Aponte. I would say, if you like that idea, Carlos has a gazillion ideas in the class called People Drawing People, which is the last class that we did before this. And Carlos is a new teacher. He teaches at the Fashion Institute of Technology. His own art is fantastic, and he thinks in terms of shape. He doesn't really think tonally very much. He thinks in terms of outline and shape, and has an incredible technique and approach to drawing that you'll gain a lot of. So I would look into that class if you have the time. But we're almost running out of time here.
We are, yeah.
Yeah. So I think that let me just see if there's one more question here. Everybody's correcting me that there were, in fact, more thumbnail users than I'm pretending that there were. Exactly. It feels like this really unusual, weird thing to be doing. Of course, it's not. Yes, Eva makes a good point about thumbnails, which is that sometimes it's a good way to find the angle or the best place to draw. I mean, I often feel like, you know, there are times when you say to yourself, "Oh, that building would be cool to draw," and then you think, "Well, how am I going to draw it?" Now, to be honest, a lot of times my motivation is, where can I sit? You know, you look for like a comfortable bench. You sit on the bench and then you think, oh, I can't really see the building that well from here. I'm gonna have to try and figure that part out. You know, so ideally you want to like kind of go around and find a great place. And if you have one of those portable folding stools, it can dramatically affect the compositional power of your drawings.
Absolutely.
Because you can actually go to a place that makes a good angle, as opposed to just drawing because there's a comfortable bench there. But yeah, so I think a lot of times for me though, I'll think it would be cool to have something in the foreground, or I want this thing to be going away from me, or I want it to be intersecting with some other thing. Things that you could work out in a thumbnail. I don't as much as I should, but I do think that it's a good practice. It's just not one that either of us particularly seems to follow. So we've learned something. We've been chastised and learned our thing.
Absolutely.
Jen is getting ready for the Urban Sketching Symposium. Excellent. So the Urban Sketching Symposium, for those of you who don't know, is going to be in Amsterdam, conveniently, in July. And Koosje will be there, and I will be there actually, because I'm going to Amsterdam in order to see what's going on with that group. So, Jen, hopefully you'll see us, and hopefully you'll come over and say hi.
There will be like thousands of people drawing in the streets.
It's true.
It'll be fun to see.
It's true. People will be climbing over weird sketchers sitting on the curb. Final question from Francine's World. She says, I view my sketchbook as a playground and approach it differently than I would a commission piece. Do the styles ever overlap? I'm not sure if she's asking us about her. When we do it, do our styles overlap? I mean, I think, I think, as we've talked about styles before, I think style is often just something that comes about as you draw a lot. You develop a style. When it comes to an illustration style, you might have different things that you do depending on what the commission is. For me personally, my sketchbook kind of is the main art that I make. So if somebody ever wants me to do a commission, it's usually based on the fact that they know that that's how I work. So to me, there isn't like a huge difference. But and I illustrate a lot of books, my own books, and most of those illustrations come out of my sketchbook. So I don't like the sketch part of sketchbook terribly much, which is strange. But sketch is a weird word. Because if you think of like a sketchy character, sketch, even the onomatopoeic value of it, it sounds scratchy, it sounds temporary, it sounds unserious. We don't see sketchbooks that way. We see sketchbooks as the final art. So there isn't really, a sketchbook isn't a place to like do thumbnails and do doodles and do all that kind of, I mean, it can be, of course, you can do whatever you want with it. But I think for both me and Koosje, it's like, that is the art that we're making. Like, we want books that are filled with great drawings and writing and ideas and stuff like that. That's the final goal. So,
and I think, just my 2 cents, I think when you're an illustrator, I think there's always an overlap, because there's a certain style, there's a certain color palette that you like to use, there's a certain handwriting that will just seep through everything. So I do think there will be an overlap, but often artists don't see it themselves. The other day I met with someone who is actually a potter, but she also does a lot of painting, and her painting has the same hand as the ceramics that she makes. There is a certain style, even though they are two completely different art. What's the word? Media. You can see that it's made by her, but she doesn't see that. She was told that it's true, so she's getting more confident about that. But I think that is absolutely true, because it comes from your brain and it's made with your hands. So of course there will be overlap.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, I think we are done. So we have one more.
Filled an hour.
Yeah, we have one more week to fill with that looks really real. And also, if you want to start thinking about what you're going to do next, that might turn out to be the colored pencil course, which is going to be starting in a couple weeks, and that will be amazing and fantastic. So if you don't know anything about it, if you go to sketchbookskool.com and find out more. All right, guys. Yeah. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again next week.
Thanks for hanging out.
Bye.
Yes. Bye.